Welcome, dear participants. Welcome to this webinar. It's the first of a series of webinars and training events that we have planned in the context of the EDSSI project. EDSSI stands for European Digital Student Service Infrastructure. It's a project funded by the European Union through the Connecting Europe facility. And it's a project that really wants to build a digital infrastructure to facilitate the international mobility of students within the framework of the European educational area. And it's really about building a digital infrastructure that connects higher education institutions, the international relations offices of universities that are responsible to promote the incoming and outgoing international mobility of students within the European educational area, together with the student service providers that can then better serve the students in an international mobility. So today we are introducing the concepts or the building blocks of the EDSSI project, what the project has achieved in terms of building this infrastructure, and developing also tools that can be used by IROs and student service providers to make this international mobility a seamless process, to make sure that students can move more freely and more easily between different higher education institutions within the European educational area. Today, I'm representing the Fondazione ENDISU, which is one of the partners of the EDSSI project. And I have the pleasure of having the company of Sara Elgomaze, who is here representing also Fondazione ENDISU, who has been working on the European student card and other digital activities to facilitate the interoperability of student services within the European educational area. Sara will give us a sense of what is the student's journey in this international mobility framework and context. I also have the pleasure of having Nikos Liolios of the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. Thank you, Nikos, for being today with us. The University of Thessaloniki has been at the forefront of digitalization transformation of higher education institutions. In addition, Nikos has been hosting the EDSSI International Conference in Thessaloniki very recently. That was a great opportunity to brainstorm with practitioners of digitalization and international mobility. I also have then the pleasure of having Bruno Pereira from the University of Porto. Bruno is a member of the software engineers team that has been instrumental in developing the dashboard and making sure that there is interoperability between different information technology infrastructures. I mentioned the international conference in Thessaloniki, which was one of the key moments of implementation of the EDSSI project. It was a great conference. We had participants from more than 30 countries, more than 150 participants, many national agencies of the Erasmus Plus program, many policymakers, many higher education institutions. And it was a great moment of bringing these stakeholders together and analyzing what are the challenges, what are the opportunities ahead to make international mobility easier. And the purpose of the webinar of today is really to introduce the key concepts of interoperability, of building a trusted network between international relations offices and student service providers so that students are better equipped and prepared to embark on international mobility. The key elements that we will be discussing today are just an introduction of what we will discuss in greater detail during the training webinar that we will be hosting in live mode on the 28th of June. Invitations to this webinar will be sent out shortly. All the information will also be available on the website of the EDSSI project. And so we will make sure that all the participants can have access directly, freely to this webinar of the 28th, where we will train participants on how to use the dashboard, how to use the EDSSI products to make sure that higher education institutions and student service providers are better connected and belong to this trusted network that we want to build together. Without further ado, let me leave the digital floor to Sara Elgomaze of Fondazione ENDISU to give us a sense of what are we looking at in terms of students' journey and what are the different facets of student service provision across Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much all for being here today with us and on this workshop on student services and on the new dashboard module. So today I will try to connect the dots with the support of my colleagues and prepare the floor to Bruno Pereira from University of Porto, who will introduce more today and on the workshop of the 28th of June, the new module of the dashboard. So the most innovative element of EDSSI project is the so-called student service providers module. So it's a new module on the dashboard that invites student service providers to the dashboard and makes it possible to share their data with the partners and students of the higher education institution in a very safe and comprehensive way in the context of the Erasmus Plus program. But there are a few questions that we want to answer today. And also on the workshop of the 28th. So what are the student services exactly, and why they are so important to consider in the exchange students' journey? Why it is important for international relation officers to work with them, and how does it increase the quality of student mobility? How can you use the student service provider module tool once it will be available for dashboard users? So those are some of the questions we will try to answer with this pre-record session and with our interactive workshop. So I will start answering the question, what are student services exactly and why they're important to consider in the exchange students' journey, from the perspective of international relation officers, but also from the perspective of student service providers. So when we talk about student services, we are referring to a huge variety of services. So some, let me share my screen. So when we talk about student services, we are referring to a huge variety of services, as I was saying. Some of those may include academic support services, academic advising, career services, housing, canteen, community service and service learning, but also counseling and financial aid, food services, health centers, and so on and so forth. So student services are seen as key components of many academic systems. So system support and services contribute indeed to the quality of student learning experience and their academic success. And according to some studies, they also help to decrease the university dropout rate and increase the diversity of students' experience. So understanding the concept of student services and their role contributes to the development of policies and strategies to support the academic field, but also drawing the necessary directions in improving service quality in higher education, also because those services contribute to the quality of the student experience and support students to achieve learning potential. We also know that in our universities and education institutions, there are a lot of exchange students coming to our cities to study for a semester, a year, or even for a shorter period of times. And one of the main goals of the European Commission is precisely to strengthen international cooperation on education and training, and expand the international dimension of the Erasmus Plus program, but both through cooperation projects and through exchange of individuals. So in this context, more and more, let's say, multicultural and diverse, it is necessary to support and enhance the student experience in a 360% way, so academically, socially, from the welfare point of view, and so on and so forth. And in this context, student services play a very crucial role, and this is why the contribution of the EDSSI project is precisely to have included for the first time in this context the concept of student services, because before then, a lot of work has been done in the exchange of data, in the simplification of bureaucratic tools that are very important in the process, but somehow the student services part was often neglected or forgotten. So the new module developed in the EDSSI project is not only something that will support international relation officers in their daily life work, support men while they are managing student exchange students, but also for student service providers who would have an easier access to the student network. And we know that foreign students contribute billions of dollars to our economy. There are lots every year, and they strengthen somehow our education quality and reach our culture. So also, if you are a student service provider, this new module will bring you an added value to your business, both if you are already working in the field or you would like to enter this market. So in a nutshell, today with us, I would like to recall a student life cycle of the mobility process in order to see together where the student services play a more crucial role. So let's imagine to have a student from University, let's say of Porto, who would like to come to study for a semester in Milano. Looking at the time of period before mobility, so there are two important elements to consider. First of all, the quality of information. Students need information that are checked and verified, because there are many studies show how funding, for example, one of the most important service for students while they're abroad, that is accommodation, is becoming more and more a challenge for students and can even become an obstacle to the mobility itself. So this is why it's important to have quality of information available before moving to destination, but also availability of the offer, especially if we look again at the accommodation service, where frequently there is insufficient housing offer and very high competition with the local students. So somehow we need to, student services are very important in this phase, but also during mobility. So we know it's a very sensitive, delicate phase of students' journey while engaged in an Erasmus or exchange program, because he or she is new in the country, so he might face cultural transition, different language and education systems, but also administrative and bureaucratic system that might vary. So services here play a very important role in their daily life. And of course, this experience will be, it's influenced also by the services provided by universities. And also looking at the conclusion of the mobility, so the after mobility. So we know that students talk each other and provide feedback one another. So it's a life cycle somehow, because the feedback of a student coming back from his or her exchange might influence the initial choice of another one. So what we should do in order to improve the student experience while involved in a mobility program, we need to foster the cooperation between involved stakeholders. So we are thinking about higher education institutions, students' organizations, student services, and all the policymakers involved in the process in order to understand the challenges and the potential behind it. And of course, we should have a systematic and holistic approach while managing the issue. So of course, to build a trusted network where international relation officers and student service providers constantly communicate is our ultimate goal, because we think is one of the key of the success. But we are also aware that we are working in a very diverse and complex context where there are different challenges. And one of it that we will have the chance to discuss in the next episode of our workshop is the diverse environment we are working on in Europe and the different module systems for student services we have in Europe. But we will discuss more about that point also with two special guests from student service provider representatives who will talk more about the challenges and the potential while working in this field. For now, I will leave the floor to Nikos and to my colleagues. From them, you will listen more about what we did concretely in EDSSI project and what are the most tangible incomes for you to use in your daily life as student service providers and as international relation officers. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sara. This has been quite an interesting introduction to what we will see in greater detail on the 28th. I want to highlight a couple of key takeaways here. I thank you for introducing the concepts of social and economic relevance of international mobility for students. Is the social dimension of what this experience really means for the students. It's also the economic relevance of these as a sector, and this should really be enticing the student service providers. This is a niche market that sometimes is neglected precisely because of the uncertainty of the timing, or you say that students come for a semester or a one academic year. These may leave them unserved by services like housing or transportation and other sort of support services. And I really liked the concept that you introduced of the feedback loop, which is very important to establish a solid reputation for this trusted network. And in reality, the EDSSI project really wants to build the infrastructure underneath this trusted network. It's an infrastructure that is digital, and that leads us to ask Nikos and to give us his perspective and his views. Nikos has been working on digitalization for higher education institutions for many years. So Nikos, give us a sense of what we will see on the 28th. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. I hope you hear me well and loud and clear. Indeed, I think that Sara very well set the floor for all this analysis that has been done regarding student services and the importance of these services for student mobility. So what about the EDSSI project and what's its contribution to these needs? So as you already mentioned, the EDSSI project wants to provide a single entry point for all academic and non-academic services across Europe, so as to simplify the administration part of these student mobilities to allow for faster processes and, of course, have the end game being the better mobility experience. So being a technical project, as Lorenzo, you mentioned before, the challenge was to try to identify some things here and to provide solutions. So except for the student services that Sara very well mentioned, the first thing was to identify student service providers. The diverse landscape that Sara mentioned, it was a challenge indeed in itself. The second part was to devise a way of collecting student service information in a single database. So, some way to centralize all this information that it's now scattered and in different places. And the last thing was also to find a way technically as well to share student services information with students. So how we can deal with these challenges. So the solution proposed by the EDSSI project was, of course, a student service providers module within the Erasmus dashboard, which is already familiar, most higher education institutions and IROs are familiar with, which will act as an SSPs and student service providers inventory. So the first challenge will be solved, and also a database of provided services, which will solve the remaining two challenges. And of course, the benefits from having such a technical solution would be to try and provide a first, let's say, solution for centralized information on services provided, which of course has the benefit in itself to have less workload for IROs and higher education institutions, because they would have direct access to this information. Also to provide targeted support to outgoing students, and this way allow for a better mobility experience for them, based on all what Sara mentioned before, the importance of having access to this information before their mobility, during the mobility, and even after the mobility. And of course, to allow for having trusted student service providers, because to be honest, there are many fraud incidents out there that are troubling our students, and so this will minimize this risk, and of course, once again, will result in a better mobility experience, which is our concern in this community. It's not just to have a technical solution for its own sake, but to have an impact on mobility experience of students, and of course, in the future for staff mobilities as well, probably at some point. So all these issues probably raise some questions that our dear colleagues that are attending this session will have to have already generated in their minds. But I'm just going to give the questions. The answer will have to be replied and responded at the training session on the 18th of June. So the first question an IRO would do, is this module obligatory? Let's see on the 28th if it is. Also, many of our colleagues might wonder if this module will allow a direct access to SSP services. Yes or no? Let's see. And okay, we already have interinstitutional agreements which have all this information about the student services. What's the added value of this SSP module? Will it bring any added value to us? And I'm not using the dashboard. I'm using another mobile software. So mobility, software. So can this be connected to it or not? And the last probably question, and many more that many may come up during the training session, and we will be glad to answer to this as well, is that why did you choose the Erasmus dashboard? Why didn't you choose another software as a solution, something that would be probably available to our university or something like that? So I think that the very intriguing questions, we have very interesting answers to these ones. So let's meet again on the 28th of June and find out what's the answers. Thank you very much, Lorenzo.
Thank you, Nikos. You're really building a sort of curiosity and thrill around the training webinar of the 28th. I also thank you because you highlighted different aspects. I mean, there is the technology side, and the technology side is really to build this trusted network. And I want to link it to the experience of international mobility. Technology can be useful to build trust between the IROs, between the service providers and the students. You also mentioned that students sometimes have bad experiences. They get less below expectations experiences in housing or in social services, in volunteering, etc. And in fact, the technology of the EDSSI dashboard and infrastructure can build trust that then can lead to reliability and increased affordability for all the experiences in the international mobility. I thank you also for raising the questions, because those are very big questions that emerged also in the brainstorming sessions with the stakeholders in Thessaloniki. And so we invite everybody to come back on the 28th where we will dig into the technology aspects and the operational aspects. Talking about how do we operate these tools and what is this dashboard that we have already mentioning, we have been mentioning already today. It's a perfect transition to leave the floor to Bruno Pereira and his team are the software engineers behind the technology applications. So I leave the floor to Bruno, who will give us an introduction of the EDSSI dashboard, what it does, and then the details of how to use it will be also part of the training webinar on the 28th. Thank you, Bruno.
Okay, just a second to share the screen. And that's it. Okay. So the dashboard implementation can be a bit tricky to understand because it's very technical. Details, the flows may be a little bit confusing. And for people who are not technical per se, it can be tricky to understand. So what I'm going to try to do here is try to demystify some of the difficulties that you may have by explaining how the dashboard seeks to achieve these goals of that Nikos mentioned. So I'm going to present here how we implemented the dashboard SSP module, or at least the version as it is now, because in the future it may contain more services, it may contain more functionalities. So here I'm going to explain how our idea and how should an IRO make the workflow of the functionalities. So the
Bruno,
Erasmus
sorry to interrupt, but before you start, could you move the microphone because it has not the best audio? If you can try now to adjust the microphone a little bit. Try now. No, now we cannot hear you. Yes.
And now?
And now it's perfect. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So as I was saying, I'm going to explain how the SSP module works on the dashboard. So the dashboard, as it is now, already contains some modules. So it has the learning agreements module, it has the IAAs module, and it has, for example, the default data or the fact sheet module. Now, the dashboard will contain an additional module on top of all this infrastructure, which is the SSP module. And the main goal of the SSP module is for institutions that represent themselves as SSPs or external SSPs. They can insert the student data and the service data into this module to be hosted on the dashboard. So the module objectives of the dashboard is for the dashboard to collect all the information regarding the student services of the institutions that it represents. And this information can be shared across multiple platforms. For example, the Erasmus Plus app, or another institution that may want to read this information. But how does this work? How does the dashboard process this? So here in this drawing, we have an IRO. And the IRO wants to go to the dashboard and add a service. So, for example, the IRO wants to say, "Oh, my university has a housing service represented by ENDISU." So, what he will do, he will go to the dashboard, to this module, and he will select the service that he wants. So he will choose housing. It can be canteen, library, but this time he's going to be choosing housing. And then he selects a provider from a list of trusted providers that we will give to the arrows. And in this case, these providers, as I mentioned, can be an external or can be the institution itself. In this case, since it's Fondazione ENDISU, it will be an external SSP. And from the dashboard SSP database, we will store this information. So we will store this IRO that is from this university uses the housing service of ENDISU. So this information will be stored in the database. And how does ENDISU give this information to the dashboard? Well, this can be several ways. It can, the main ones that we are thinking is having an interface so that the SSPs can actually go to the dashboard and insert the information in the form, or it can be through an API, that is through a service that will be implemented in these SSPs. Afterwards, when this selection is stored in the database, the IRO can choose to share this SSP information across multiple platforms. It can choose to make this information public. It can choose to make this information available only to other dashboard partners. It can even choose to make this information available in the AWP network or the Erasmus Plus app. You can choose this for each of the services. So even if I had a canteen or a library, I can choose for those two services independently the visibility. So if I have a housing service that is only shared on the dashboard for dashboard partners, if I am an external partner that does not use the dashboard, I will not be able to see this service. So it's just filtered only to what the IRO wants to share across the network. And speaking of the network, this is the SSP information flow. So it may already answer a question or two that Nikos proposed, but basically that's it. This SSP APIs and the SSP module is for people to actually ask the holders of the information, what do you give? So for example, if I am a dashboard institution, I will not ask an external university, let's say for example University of Warsaw, I will not ask her what services does the SSP ENDISU provide. No, I'm going to ask directly ENDISU for those services. So the idea is that the SSPs actually are integrated in the network, so that institution, whether they use the dashboard or are using their own system, they can ask each other and be interconnected. This information can be interconnected through APIs. So I can ask the dashboard for information. I can ask the ENDISU for information. I can ask other institutions for the information that they represent. And this is to create this sort of, well, interoperability between each other. So these are some a little taste of what the dashboard already supports through some screenshots. So as you can see in the first figure, this is the selection where I can choose the service and who provides it. So in this case, as you can see, I'm choosing the accommodation service, and then I can choose if I want only my own information, if I support myself, or an external SSP. And as you can see in the figure 2, I chose own information, and a form appeared where I can select where I can put the information that I want to give to the dashboard. And these fields are unique for each service. So the fields for accommodation are different than the fields for a canteen, for example. As you can see in this figure, I already added a canteen for this institution. So I can see the details of the canteen. As you can see, mentioning what I said previously, I can see the average cost of a meal that me as this institution represent myself. I can see the cost of the meal, which is not available in the accommodation service. So this is an example of seeing how I can add a service and how I can see the details of the service. And right here, as you can see, is me. Instead of choosing the own information, I'm choosing an external SSP. So in this case, I chose the SSP. This is an imaginary SSP, of course, Provider Inc. And I can see that the Provider Inc. supports this library. And I can choose to add it. That is to say, I am using the library from Provider Inc., which contains these details. And of course, this will be stored as a sort of an archive or a library for me. So I can see I support these services from these different providers, and I can share it across the network at will. So that's it for my side, and thank you for witnessing. And if you have any more questions, if you have a question, well, see you on the 28th.
Exactly. Thank you, Bruno. This is really useful to understand, to see what is behind the dashboard, and to realize that the dashboard is really user-friendly, is really available to all the higher education institutions, the IROs, to plug in all different information for student service providers. We will go into the details and the nitty-gritty of how to use the dashboard, the interoperability, the compatibility aspects. This is quite an introduction to the many things that we will see on the 28th. We will have a panel discussion with service providers. As Sara mentioned, we will have hence the ability to talk firsthand with student service providers, understand what are the challenges that they have in serving students on an international mobility. We will finally get the answers to Nikos' questions, which are the very legitimate questions that any IRO, any higher education institution may raise. And so what is it? Is it mandatory? That's the first question, because I think that we will trigger a lot of interest and enthusiasm for participants. So I think that we have a lot of interesting topics that we will delve into on the 28th. I want to thank again Sara, Nikos, and Bruno for their introduction. It is a very good overview of the topics that will be discussed in greater detail on the 28th. Just a final remark, I wanted to share my screen to show the EDSSI architecture. Now, this, of course, is something that may be off-putting for those who are not familiar with the EDSSI project. But this is really the three blocks that the EDSSI tackled: the authentication and authorization block, where you see the higher education institutions with the My Academic ID, the European student cards, etc. And then also the different aspects of interoperability. And this is what Nikos was mentioning. How do we go into making sure that different higher education institutions can use different architectures and softwares? And this is then the zoom in into the aspects of implementation of the dashboard. This is our website for any major questions or any interesting news that you will find on our project. This is a beautiful picture of the final conference of the EDSSI. Thank you again to the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. And this is where you will find the link to our training webinar of the 28th. I will stop sharing here my screen. I stop, and in case of questions, you know how to reach us. You saw the website, and we look forward to hosting a big cohort of users for the 28th. Thank you very much, and see you on the 28th.